Global warming. Is it causing chaos and economic devastation worldwide? That's what activists at the U.S. Federal Reserve want you to believe. Our next guest says he's done his own research. He's found the Fed and others are full of hot air. David Barker is a former economist at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York and partner in the Barker Companies. David, thanks for being here. So first, remind us of what the Fed and other climate change advocates are saying about the effects of warming on global economies.
Well, the Federal Reserve has done a couple of studies that they claim show that higher temperatures will lead to lower economic growth. And of course, growth is important. If we have economic growth, then in the future, everyone will be a lot wealthier. So if higher temperatures would affect growth, that would be a serious problem.
But you say other countries, maybe not so much so. They highlight a number of them. So how is this affecting loans and the flow of money?
Oh, well, so the Federal Reserve wants to use climate change they want to force banks to look at their climate risk, and which I believe will lead eventually to lending restrictions. Policy, the Federal Reserve is trying to make climate policy through the banking system.
Well,
The problem,
what are some of the countries that they're talking about here, and what is the problem with it?
well, so the research that they did was looking both at state by state data in the United States and country by country data around the world. And when I looked carefully at that research, there were all kinds of problems. So, for example, every country in the world was weighted equally. China weighted the same as St. Vincent, a tiny country in the Caribbean. And a few small countries have very unusual economic circumstances. Some might have giant oil discoveries in a year that happened to be a little bit cooler than average. Other countries had catastrophes that had nothing to do with climate change. But those small countries threw the statistical results off. They used very sophisticated statistical techniques, but those small countries magnified the effects that they were looking for. And when I made some very simple and reasonable adjustments, their results went away.
Well, I know I've been to a lot of these countries, and one, for example, Sudan. And I noticed 30 years I've been going to Sudan, and nothing has changed. I mean, people were starving back 30 years ago. They still are today. It's just the way their climate is there, and they've cut down all the trees. So how much of this is legitimate, though? Is there a legitimate concern here?
No, when I looked carefully at the data and corrected some of the errors in the Fed studies, there was no effect at all of temperature on economic growth. Again, it was driven by a few outlier countries that were affected by factors completely unrelated to climate change.
Well, how does all this credit system then come in, where you buy credits and like you said, China is given the same type of treatment as the United States when they're one of the greatest polluters out there?
Well, yes, that's an important issue that no matter what we do, if the rest of the world doesn't take climate change seriously and continues with the current practices, then what we do will have no effect at all, even if you accept the premises behind the climate change movement.
What else did you find, David, in your research?
Well, I found basically that there was that there's no reason to fear economic catastrophe from climate change. Some of the best research that has been done on the economic effects of temperature were by William Nordhaus, Nobel Prize winning economist. Now, he believes in doing some things about climate change, but his research shows that it's not a coming catastrophe. And if you think about economic growth, if we continue to have normal economic growth over the next several decades, that will completely swamp any effect of climate change. In other words, if climate change might reduce GDP by a few percentage points, 2% growth a year for the next 80 years will mean that we're all 5 times richer in the future than we are now. And so being 4.9 times richer instead of 5.1 times richer is not a catastrophe.
I think maybe the debt ceiling and our budget here in the U.S. It should be more of a concern. So what response did you receive from the Fed and others when you pointed out the errors in their findings and their advocacy?
No response at all. In fact, my findings were published in an academic peer-reviewed journal called Econ Journal Watch, which the mission of that journal is to publish critiques of articles that are in other academic journals. And that journal provides space for authors who are critiqued to respond. And that offer continues to be open, but not a word from the Fed, and not a word from most of the press either. They lavished attention on these studies when they were first published, but there has been no news coverage of the fact that they've been debunked.
And you have a PhD. Have your writings been peer reviewed?
Yes, yes, and in fact, these papers that critiqued the Federal Reserve were peer reviewed, and I have published peer reviewed research on other topics also.
So, David, finally, is this all about money?
Well, there certainly is money to be made on climate change. There are companies that are manufacturing all sorts of things that they hope to promote, of course, including electric vehicles, solar farms, windmills, heat pumps, all kinds of things like that. And so it's certainly worth considering that when there's a group pushing an agenda like this and is money to be made, whether there's a connection there.
Okay, we've got about 30 seconds. What do we do about it?
Well, I think the important thing is to question what we're told on things like this, and to look carefully. Open the hood on this research and find the flaws, because otherwise people can publish papers, claim that they are authoritative, and no one questions them, and it's very difficult to work against that. So I think it's very important to look carefully at that research and find the flaws in it.
A lot of disinformation out there that we have to weed our way through. Okay, David Barker, former Federal Reserve economist and partner of Barker Companies. Thank you, David, for taking the time to share your insights. We appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.